ladies and gentlemen of the Hist, ladies and gentlemen, fellow debaters, Senator Barrett. I stand before you tonight to propose the case for the abolition of the Seanad, and this being the Hist of what might begin with history in vague terms anyway. I mean, the actual idea of an upper house we can trace back as far as ancient Rome and before, where they established democracy, but they went away from the old Athenian ideal of democracy, which is absolute and participatory from everyone, at least if you were a landowning man. That's beside the point. They established a second house, and this was controlled by the patricians, by the ruling elite, to take power away from the masses, that this wasn't real democracy. From the very beginning, that's what it was all about. And you can see that this echoes throughout all of history. When you look in Britain, the first step away from absolute monarchy was the establishment of the Council of Barons, which gave power, to a small group of the ruling elite just below the very top echelon of the king. And throughout the history of Britain, eventually a second house parliament was created, and more power began to go to this house from the upper house, until eventually later on more and more power was given to the lower house and to the masses, and actual democracy was installed, while the power was taken away from the king and the powerful aristocrats and the religious institutions. And then you can look at somewhere like the United States, where a second house was installed to hold a super powerful Congress to account, when in fact it has always had the exact opposite effect. Because again, the ruling elite, the aristocrats, the rich and the powerful, are able to use the upper house to consolidate and extend their own power, because they can control the upper house even to a greater extent than they already control the lower house. And then you can look at the individual state models of parliamentary democracy in the United States. And so they pretty much all follow the federal model, except for Nebraska, which it abolished the second house and now there's one house, the Nebraska legislature. When Nebraska has done just as well, if not better, in their legislation since that. And the same is true of New Zealand, which you mentioned, which in 1947 abolished the second house. And since then again, there's been no negative consequences to that. No, maybe later, thanks. New Zealand is consistently ranked the most free and among most well-off countries in the entire world, despite having maybe because they have no second house. Again, we can continue on a bit longer, please. So, what is the point in all this? It's to show the fundamental lunacy in the idea of it, just the concept of it. So now everybody here has accepted that the Seanad doesn't function as an effective House of Parliament. Yet many are arguing for reform. And I want to show why this idea is not only as absurd, but actually far more absurd than the idea of retention. So the debate over the existence of the Seanad has existed for as long as the actual institution itself. As far back as 1957, the Irish Independent editorial accurately describes the Seanad as being an insult to democracy, but concedes that it does serve a purpose, to serve as a pension house for politicians. And since then, there's been no major drive for reform. The consecutive governments who have run the state and in both houses have been happy to maintain a home for those colleagues in and out of their way in office. It is both a Montessori and a retirement home. The great supporter of Seanad abolition, Michael Duach, famously said, the Seanad is still struggling to justify its existence after 3/4 of a century. So, now, however, these governments never tabled any option for reform, as soon as the government finally does, no thanks. The Fianna Fáil party and their Green Party friends and their ex-PD friends, and all those friends who've been in government, they're very quick to criticise the government making a power grab. But like Owen said, there's no power grab because there's no power to grab. In fact, the one thing that you can really say about the Seanad is that it has no power. So in some ways, it's actually kind of neutral. It has no power to push through the agenda of the wealthy and elite people who control this upper house. There is no democratic accountability. Yes.
So would you change your mind if the Seanad did have power and it was reformed and they could check on the 4 people who are making all the decisions in this country?
No, it's the reason why I oppose even if the Seanad is retained, I'll actually vote against reform most likely if it's anything like the reform being tabled. Because all it's going to do is retain it as an institution which is elitist, and then give it greater power to be able to push through its agenda. So if it was completely democratic and empowered, then maybe. But then why have it in the first place? Why not just put a mirror around the dog maybe some dry ice for smoke effects. And this is why the Reform Seanad, as Professor Michael Gallagher at Trinity rightly pointed out, will actually be the worst decision of all. And where democratic functions are already carried out by the lower house, the upper house exists fundamentally for the powerful to control. And in a Reform Seanad, the upper house has greater power to achieve its objectives. Objectives not decided by popular consensus, not decided by democracy, not decided by the people or masses, but by the people who control the upper house.
If you had a properly elected upper house, as the Dáil currently is, how would that be controlled by the elites any more than the Dáil currently is as it stands?
So, I mean, I just talked about this, the idea of having a completely democratic upper house. But in what way would that differ from the Dáil? Why have a second Dáil? Why not empower the Dáil committees and maybe local government? Why not have actual reform instead of just putting in extra houses of parliament? Why not have a third house of parliament? South Africa has 3 houses of parliament, 4th, 5th, 6th house of parliament. No, how many do we need? I mean, some... 7 houses of parliament is what this house or this side of the house is suggesting. Okay. And, you know, some of the ideas, again, like Owen said, that there is no consensus whatsoever on what reform would actually look like. One of my favourite ideas was that the Seanad, you get rid of all the sitting centres and replace it with 2 randomly selected primary school children every county. That is by far the best option for reform I've ever heard. And you know, the provost himself could dish out the lunch boxes of juice gardens in that regard, I suppose. So in conclusion, as we've seen, the Seanad is an elitist and undemocratic relic of the evolution of parliamentary democracy, whose only real benefit is the little amount of power it actually has to take away from the democratic process that it would otherwise do, aside from some embezzling of funds, see either Callaway at all. No government's been active in making anything other than this, because that would be against their interests. When someone finally proposes abolishing the institution once and for all, so we complete the transition of power from the monarch to the actual masses, the other political parties seek to maintain it and even have power in order to stop this transition from taking place. This is an insult. The Seanad is an insult. Thus, I beg you to vote yes in the Seanad referendum on Friday, and I beg you to propose.